I'm Deborah Douglas.
And I'm Amber Payne.
And you're listening to Episode 5 of Black News Hour, a new radio partnership between the Boston Globe and historic Boston Black News. We are here as Black journalists to bring conversations about the news of the day to our loyal BBN listeners. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Today, it's all about the Emancipator. So the Emancipator is a revival and a reimagining of the nation's first abolitionist newspaper for a new day. Our goal is to reframe the conversation on racial justice and infuse it with context and perspective. And Deborah and I are the Emancipator's co-editors-in-chief, and we wanted to spend this episode spotlighting two really prolific writers and scholars who are key voices in this discussion about racial equity and this moment we're in.
Thank you. So joining us and celebrating today are Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who co-founded this iteration of the Emancipator, and author and Emerson professor Jabari Asim. We'll be talking about why this project is important now and why we all hope what it will do for Boston and the nation. Got questions during the show? We're here for it. Call us at 617-265-2679 or ask us on Twitter using the hashtag Black News Hour.
And for more content like this, or to subscribe to our BNH newsletter, you can visit globe.com/Black News Hour.
Amber, before we bring our guest on, I would like to spend a little time talking about the mission of the Emancipator and why reviving it at this moment is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, I wanted to even introduce ourselves to everybody. We're both new to Boston. We're longtime journalists. What could you share with everybody? I get to interview you now. This is fun. Just what in your career and your life really led you to this moment of joining the Emancipator?
Yeah, I really feel like all roads led me to the Emancipator. I'm kind of a journalism nerd. I decided this is the career that I wanted to have when I was 8 years old.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, but most recently, I was living in Chicago, but teaching in central Indiana, outside of Indianapolis. I was the Eugene S. Pulliam Distinguished Visiting Professor of Journalism at DePaul University. And I used that opportunity to create the kind of classes, to teach the kind of things that I thought I should have learned before I went into a newsroom, before I learned a lot of bad habits.
Yeah.
And I was the founding managing editor of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, where we focused on poverty, power, and policy in Memphis, Tennessee. And as you can see, I'm a hustler. I am also a senior leader at the Op-Ed Project, where we work to amplify underrepresented expert voices. What about you, Amber?
Yeah. I spent the first decade of my career in broadcast. I was a producer at NBC Nightly News, and in that time, I was really learning to just work on breaking news, but I also learned very quickly, that as one of the few black people in the room, often sometimes the only black person in the newsroom at that moment or day, that people were looking to me to talk about black stories or have an opinion on it. One day, my executive producer even called me out. Amber, what do you think about this story? I was really offended at first. Why is she picking on me? It's so obvious. And then I reclaimed that, and I just felt like, you know what, I want to be the one that they call upon for these stories. And you know what, they shouldn't have to call on me to give my perspective. I should have one already. I should be raising my hand to pitch a story or to guide them or steer them away from something that might be problematic. So I think it was that moment that really propelled my being really alert to being aware of stories about our community and speaking up for them, standing up for them. So after that, I continued with video. I led video at Teen Vogue and BET. But I feel like everything has led me to the Emancipator, where I'm just excited to get an opportunity to tell stories with context. So much of the news that we read, having worked in breaking news, you report the story, you do it well, but having that perspective and context, I think, is really needed right now.
Yeah, you talked about being singled out as a black journalist in the newsroom, but is the Emancipator just a publication for black people?
No, it is black led. It is for us. It is by us, but it is not just for us. I think we all know that this is a fight. The fight against racism is something that everyone is implicated in. And so black, white, any race, we're really positioning ourselves as a place for people to be a resource.
Yeah. Why is Boston so important in this story?
Yeah, I mean, Boston, it's where the bricks of democracy were laid. It's this home of the abolitionist movement that we take this inspiration from. And so I think we're building upon that history, and Boston is a microcosm for national issues. Right. What do you think about that?
Oh my goodness. I mean, this is such a rich city to begin to tell a story that we have to tell. I mean, you could take almost any data point and it's emblematic of a collective experience by communities of interest across the country. So I'm just really looking forward to drilling down at the community level and centering the voices of people in the community who are experts on their own lives, the beautiful part about the Emancipator, I think, is the opportunity to bring in scholarly voices, who are or will bring deeply evidence-based commentary to our platform, but also to center community voices because they're the experts on their lives.
Absolutely. Would you give everyone a little history of the Emancipator? We're talking about abolition. I know you're the journalism history nerd. You've been getting some research together.
Yeah. So the Emancipator was born in Jonesboro, Tennessee in 1820. It was published by Elihu Embry. And it actually debuted in April 1820, and it was solely focused on the advocacy of the abolition of black enslavement. And Elihu had a Quaker background, but he was a practicing deist, and embedded in that is a passion for justice. And he was described as having a fiery personality. And the Emancipator in that incarnation only published for a few issues, but the brand was resurrected later on in New York City and eventually moved to Boston, which makes such perfect sense because Boston was the center of the abolitionist movement and home to many abolitionist newspapers that were solely focused on advocating for abolition and imagining the kind of world that free black people would step into and plotting out the course of what it means to be fully implicated in the American project.
Yeah, I love that. It does give us inspiration. And we took a field trip to the Boston Public Library where you can actually check out on microfilm. You can check out the original Emancipator. What stood out to you in our little
the issues that I was looking at was talking about the annexation of Texas. It was for many issues just a raging debate about potential presidential candidates and how the Texas question was a litmus test for who you should vote for. And I knew that was an important issue, but just to see it, frozen in time like that, I didn't realize how important the Texas question was. And it was important because it was like, are we going to double down on this whole slavery thing?
Right.
Or are we going to go another way?
Right. And there are parallels we can draw to today. And I know that's what we're going to be able to do in our coverage. Something that stood out to me, I mean, it's a newspaper. It's got marriage announcements, deaths.
Right.
There were some an advertisement for Swedish leeches, some interesting products of the time. And then, the editorials, there's one that stood out to me. It began with this passage. I'll read a little. Nor is the slave the only victim. Slavery poisons everything with which it comes in contact. If the oppressed is crushed, neither does the oppressor escape. In sinning against his brother, he does violence against his own soul. So, that also just reinforces, that everyone is implicated by racism. Change the word slavery to racism.
Absolutely. And
you have a new conversation, right?
Yes. So they talked about, emancipation all day, every day, and that's what we'll be doing too, all day, every day, on purpose.
Yeah. What do you see as our opportunity here with bringing this about and being in part of this media landscape, which people find so overwhelming?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's missing context to the issues. People have a surface level understanding of the day's issues. And I think as journalists, we're duty bound to dig deeper. And part of digging deeper is to pull that historic through line, you know, from the past to the present. You know, it's not all brand new, right? Yeah. And so we can go look at the past and learn what we did, what we did better, and what we really never addressed, and look for really great ideas, like I said, deeply evidence-based scholarly ideas to pursue solutions to the issues that vex us most. And I'm thinking things like everything from, you know, educational access, or, you know, access to voting.
Yeah. I'm definitely also excited about that, bringing the context and scholarship. You know, there's so many scholarly works, books, even academics who are writing and doing research that it doesn't make it into a nice little 700-word op-ed,
Absolutely,
you know, in the Globe or the Times. And there's a lot of work that should be elevated and translated.
And there are a lot of expert voices that we need to hear from, especially from underrepresented communities. Women don't have a fair share of voice in the public conversation. People of color don't have a fair share of voice in the public conversation. And we just need to you know, open the door and center all voices and perspectives, because we're all in this together.
Yeah. And we've talked about our mission and how we want to dismantle racist policies and institutions, and talk about solutions and how we can replace them with systems that are inclusive and that work. But what do you think, for you, what does that translate into as when it comes to storytelling? What does that really mean in the stories we're going to do?
I'm really excited about this solutions journalism approach that we'll be using. And it uses a practice called asset framing, which is to define people and communities by their aspirations, about the things they get up to do, to purpose themselves, to make themselves better every day. The opposite of that is deficit framing. And deficit framing is taking the worst thing that's ever happened to a person or community and telling that story over and over again. And so you get stuck in this loop. And I don't know if a lot of people feel that sort of fatigue in the media environment, where you know what a story is going to say even before you get all the way through it. But if you look at people through their aspirations, you have such a much richer story to tell.
Definitely. I agree. And, you know, I think even just the word emancipation and the Emancipator, one of our advisory board members, Sewell Chan, I love how he put it when he talked to us. You know, we're talking about emancipation from racist ideas, from bigotry, from disinformation, from misinformation.
Absolutely.
So really freeing minds, hearts, and finding ways to help people to understand the world around them.
Yeah. So just a reminder that if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to call us at 617-265-2679. Or tag us on Twitter using the hashtag BlackNewsHour. We also want to share a public service announcement. And after the break, we'll be back with how to be an anti-racist author and the Emancipator co-founder, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi.
So we have Ibram coming up. We're really excited to have him be joining us in this conversation. I'm going to just do an in-house ad for us first. This February, the Boston Globe honors the lives, culture, and creativity of Black Americans during Black History Month Film Festival, presented by UBS. Each week, screen new and classic films, and join virtual events led by Globe journalists with filmmakers and community voices. Register for all screenings and discussions at globe.com/events. Deborah, there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about in your career history. There's a great profile of you in the BU magazine. We're going to get to that. Oh, we have our guest on the phone. Hold on one second. Dr. Kendi is here.
Okay, again, you're listening to Black News Hour, and today's episode is all about the Emancipator, a revival of the nation's first abolitionist newspaper launched 200 plus years ago. I'm Deborah D. Douglas.
And I'm Amber Payne, and we are the co-editors-in-chief of the Emancipator. And today we're talking with one of the Emancipator's co-founders, the prolific Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Dr. Kendi is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University and the founding director of the BU Center for Anti-Racist Research. He's a contributing writer at The Atlantic and a CBS News racial justice contributor. Dr. Kendi is the author of many highly acclaimed books, including Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction, making him the youngest ever winner of that award. He had also produced 5 straight #1 New York Times bestsellers, including How to Be an Anti-Racist Baby, and Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, co-authored by Jason Reynolds. In 2020, Time magazine named Dr. Kendi one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He was awarded a 2021 MacArthur Fellowship, popularly known as the Genius Grant. And his next 2 books coming out in June are How to Raise an Anti-Racist and the picture book, Good Night Racism. Dr. Kendi, welcome.
Good morning. Pleasure to be on with each of you. I'm so excited.
Thank you for joining us. So I just want to kick off the first question to ask you, where do you think the Emancipator fits into the public consciousness right now?
So I think there are a number of different ways in which it fits. I think first and foremost, there are many people who are losing or who have already lost sort of hope that we could reimagine and recreate this nation, that we could sort of abolish racism. And I think part of the reason potentially why some people may have lost that hope, that vision, is because there isn't a publication that is charting that path. And so I think the Emancipator could help sort of chart the path of precisely how we move this nation from this current sort of society of widespread racial injustices to a just and equitable society for all. And then I also think very quickly that the Emancipator will, along the way, be able to really focus on that recreation, focus on what we need to do, focus on what needs, to be solved. And I think that's very important in our current discourse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you teed up my next question, which was really about the public mood and how people are processing what many consider is the failure of Congress to just really close on some critical policies, universal student loan forgiveness, a robust infrastructure policy, or voting rights. And I was listening to TikTok, because we know I'm obsessed with TikTok. Listening to AOC on TikTok yesterday, she was talking about the public mood and how people are feeling demoralized right now, and the fact that is the function of propaganda. So talk to us a little bit about how we can purpose ourselves to generate some energy and stay connected and educated and stay in the fight for the rights that we all deserve.
Well, first, I'm really looking forward to the Emancipator's TikTok program, Parental Douglas. But I think that, sort of riffing a little bit off of AOC and also what you just stated, I don't think people realize how demoralizing it was to be living in Boston or New York or even Charleston, South Carolina, as slavery was spreading and growing, and as slave power was sort of increasing, particularly within the federal government. But still, Mariah Stewart and David Walker and William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and a host of other abolitionists refused to not stop fighting for immediate, emancipation. And so for me, and I think this speaks to the Emancipator in and of itself, like if those abolitionists could still be hopeful, if they could still be focused, if they could still refuse to allow the propaganda of slaveholders to cause them to believe that slavery was permanent, then why can't we? Why can't we in this moment?
Absolutely. And Dr. Kendi, I wanted to also talk to you about the Supreme Court. I mean, this is a huge story this week, the fact that Judge Stephen Breyer is retiring. And we're hearing short-listed names like Ketanji Brown Jackson, Leandra R. Kruger, just to name two of the many black women. I think we were all retweeting, there's like a little Brady Bunch box of all these black women who are qualified. We are sharing that. We're raising that up. But what is the power, the challenge, and opportunity embedded in this moment?
I think the challenge has already sort of shown itself by the reaction of those who are riddled with racist and sexist ideas that imagine that a black woman, or focusing on nominating a black woman, that somehow you're not going to also get a qualified and esteemed sort of candidate. But the fact of the matter is when you shut out black women all this time, what that meant is you're shutting out a whole bunch of qualified people. So you got a whole bunch of folks, to choose from, and that's the sort of reality. Just as it's the reality that there's nothing wrong with black women or any other group of black people or people of color. The opportunity is that, and I sort of write about this in my work. In many ways, black women have been at the forefront of anti-racism, since sort of its emergence, in this country. And I think for me, and I know for other people who know the history of Amaya Stewart or Ida B. Wells or Zora Neale Hurston or an Angela Davis or even a Sherilyn Ifill today, there's a certain level of trust that you'll have, in a black woman, particularly, a well-qualified, progressive black woman who'll sit in that seat because you'll know she'll fight for us.
Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. I was taking a look at some of the numbers. The 19th News had reported this, that 20 of Biden's judicial nominations, 22 are former public defenders, and 15 of those have been confirmed so far. So I wanted to also just kind of tailor this question more to ask about the power of diversifying the courts and the judicial system, and especially at the judicial level, where it sometimes feels like it's kind of a mystery as to who's behind the bench and on the bench. So in the context of, we're talking about the Emancipator and the power of dismantling institutions or really examining them. What else? What is the opportunity that you see in kind of shifting the landscape of the court system?
Well, I think within racial justice spaces, we of course talk quite a bit about power. I have degrees in Black studies, and of course, we read about and discussed power when I was sort of training, but there was actually I never took a specific course on power, and I think there's still so much to learn about power, and I think specifically within the American context, power, or more specifically, those who have the ability to make and shape sort of policy that governs the lives of people, largely operate within, obviously, executives like a president of the United States, certainly legislators like members of Congress, but then also among judges. And I think that we, of course, African Americans know that history from Plessy v. Ferguson to Brown v. Board of Education, but I think it's just critically important to remember that not having diverse courts is not diversifying power, and that's why it's so critically important.
Definitely. And I wanted to also ask you about just this burgeoning so-called parental rights movement. It's aimed at everything from banning books to banning CRT, critical race theory, in public schools, even though there's no proof that this law school theory is taught at that level. So tell, where do you see that going? This parental rights movement, maybe help our listeners kind of understand what that is and what we need to be attuned to and looking out for here on that.
Well, first, to me, the whole construct of a parent rights movement that completely ignores the rights and the viewpoints of parents of color and even of anti-racist white parents is no parents' rights movement, particularly when the majority of parents in this country, like that group of people, parents of color and white anti-racist parents make up the majority. So it's actually not, to me, a parents' rights movement when you're actually ignoring the viewpoints and the desires, and even the rights of the majority of parents. What it is actually, a way to ensure that particularly, Republican, but not all, Republican people in positions of power can continue to defend and institute racist policies, and their own constituents not being able to recognize that those policies, that those structures that they're reinforcing, are indeed racist, and they can continue to imagine that they're following the dream of King and making him into someone he was never striving, to be. And so it's really to fool and manipulate and hoodwink their own constituents and to engage in that level of propaganda, which then leads to, so many people, unfortunately, living in this world of make-believe.
Yeah, we're getting to the end of our question time, but I just want to follow that up with the question of, do you think we're still adjudicating Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated public schools?
Oh, without question. And I think it is important for us to remember that the opposition to the desegregation of schools was a so-called parents' rights movement. Mm-hmm. And so it's a continuation of that idea. It's easy for us to forget that it was President Eisenhower who said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing it, that they are basically parents who don't want their little white girl to be sitting in a classroom with that big black buck. It was this idea that it would be uncomfortable for black and white children, but particularly white children, to be in schools together, and that parents should have the right and the ability to send their kids wherever they wanted to, and to even resist, of course, busing, which of course became a national story through what happened here in Boston. And so, it's the continuation of some of the same ideas, and then it was the justification of segregation. Now it's the justification of the segregating of knowledge. So just as they were trying to keep black kids out of their schools, now they're trying to keep black authors out of their schools.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Kendi. Definitely looking out for your upcoming books, Goodnight Racism. I love that the tagline I saw on social, dreaming gives you the power to imagine a new world. That is just beautiful and powerful. So thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to staying in this work with you at the Emancipator. And before we speak with, thank you. Before we speak with our next guest, esteemed writer Jabari Asim, we want to share a public service announcement.
Keep the conversation going with the Globe's Black News Hour newsletter. Sign up for exclusive show recaps, go deeper on the issues impacting our community, and take part in celebrating Black lives, all curated by Globe journalists. Sign up now at globe.com/news. Black News Hour.
And if you're just tuning into the Black News Hour, this is Amber Payne with the Emancipator.
And this is Deborah D. Douglas with the Emancipator. As a reminder, if you'd like to field questions to us anytime during today's show, feel free to call us at 617-265-2679 or ask on Twitter using the hashtag Black News Hour. We're going to dig right into our conversation with our next guest, Jabari Asim. Jabari Asim is a professor and Elma Lewis Distinguished Fellow in Social Justice at Emerson College. He is the author of 13 books for children and 8 books for adults. His books include The N-Word, Who Can Say It and Who Shouldn't and Why We Can't Breathe, and Why We Can't Breathe, On Black Lives, White Lies, and the Art of Survival. Oh, and one of my favorites, Preaching to the Chickens, the story of young John Lewis. A Guggenheim Fellow and a longtime journalist, Jabari Asim has had work published in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, American Prospect, and the New Republic. Thank you for joining us, Jabari.
Good morning. You guys sound great.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for being on with us on the Black News Hour today. We are excited to spend the rest of our airtime in conversation with you, responding to your questions about the Emancipator. And before that conversation, let's answer the first question here.
Well, Deborah, you have to reveal that you know Jabari.
Okay, I know
You've
Jabari.
talked to him. Jabari, it's great to meet you. Hello. But Deborah, you have just been, since we first met for the first time, you've told me about Jabari.
Jabari and Liana, that's Jabari's wife. They're two of my favorite people in the whole world. We went to undergrad together. They were my big brother and sister when I was a little baby freshman at Northwestern University studying journalism for the first time. And they were just always so encouraging and nurturing. Even to this day, I will be forever their little sister.
Talk about full disclosure, man. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, Jabari, you just wrote a novel, Yonder, a novel. Tell us a little bit about what Yonder is about, really.
Sure. It takes place in an unknown region of the American South in 1852. And it sort of relentlessly tells the story of several couples who are romantically connected, but it's difficult to maintain those connections in a time and place in which the separation of black people who dare to love each other is both legally and brutally enforced. So they have to come up with resources and methods to overcome these barriers so that they can sustain and secure their loving relationships.
I love that. So could you set the scene for us a little bit, please, by reading a brief passage?
Sure, I'll read you a paragraph. One of the narrators is a man named William, so he's telling this paragraph. As we patted the earth smooth and covered it with brush, I remembered something Gimme Jack had told me. I repeated it to Cato. You know the worst thing a thief can ever say to you? You've been sold? No. It's, let me tell you a story. You hear those words? Run.
Wow. Well, I finished your book. I listened to the audio version. I have it here in the studio. I'm going to hold it up for the camera. Beautiful artwork on the book. But, the passage you just read, I was struck immediately by the way you used thieves for the slave owners, and the slaves were called stolen, and they refer to themselves as the stolen and to the white man and the white people as the thieves. And, the way that you, it just seems so obvious that that's the terminology. So that really stood out to me. And Deborah and I were talking about this yesterday. The way that you've peopled this story is really beautiful. So tell us a little bit about your process of surfacing characters like Double Sam, one of my favorites, Silent Mary, love Pandora, and that darn Cupid.
Yes, it was important to establish the world that these characters lived in, what they were up against, what existed to support them, what their own rituals and practices were to get them through the day. And I thought it was necessary to outline those elements so that readers would appreciate when they begin to talk about transcendence and triumph, what exactly they were transcending, what circumstances that they were facing. And also, these characters are not under any delusions about the roots of their circumstances. They were stolen, and, thieves steal. So the language had to sort of frame the cosmology, the worldview that these characters had. And I thought it was important for readers to get that understanding.
So, Jabari, this story feels so different from your previous writing across many genres. And I'm just wondering what drives you to write and communicate in so many different forms?
Well, I think the model there was Langston Hughes. When I was an undergrad, I read Faith Berry's biography of Langston Hughes, and then a couple of years later I read Arnold Rampersad's magisterial 2-volume biography of Langston Hughes. And one of the things that struck me is that he was one of the very first, if not the first. You could make an argument for Paul Laurence Dunbar, but if not Dunbar, Langston Hughes was the first black writer to make a living entirely as a writer, for all of his life. And I thought, there's a model for me. How did he do that? And one way he did that was he wrote in every available genre. Someone could call him and say, I need a libretto. I have a composition, I need a libretto. And he would say, I can do that. Publisher would call and say, we need a children's book for, young African-American readers. And he would say, I can do that. So I wanted to be in a position where I could have that same response.
Yeah. That's really powerful. And I just to stay on the book a little longer, though, I wanted to ask you about the power of words and the power of the written word. There are themes in the book that feel very relatable now. And to be honest, sometimes when I see there's a new show about slavery or a new book, I kind of tense up a little bit about how that experience is going to be to live through that. But there were so many beautiful aspects of your storytelling that said a lot about love. I was struck by, the thieves questioning the existence of black love. I was struck by the strength of the women in the story and their resolve. They were relentless. They were daring to love. And then this power of the written word. Your character Cato, he literally eats the pages of a book. He's practicing reading, and for fear that he's going to get caught. And so, can you speak a little bit about some of those themes and how you feel they really are still very contemporary?
Sure. I mean, to borrow your phrase, how they lived through it. And I think, I just wanted to emphasize that of course slavery is suffering and oppression. But the fact that the three of us are having this conversation is evidence that our ancestors, in fact, lived through it. And how did they live through it? I mean, obviously they had to rely on each other. They had to build loving relationships. And so part of what I'm pushing back against there is this narrative that Thomas Jefferson popularized, Notes on the State of Virginia. He wrote that black people were incapable of genuine romantic love, and that we only indulged our animal desires, our animal appetites. And, that's absurd. I mean, that's utter BS, right? And so, I mean, we know this. We love each other. We love fearlessly. We love tirelessly. And so I wanted to portray that in the work, in the novel, and I thought that was really important. And also, in all of my books, I address what I call narrative combat, which is the clash of stories, right? And so our oppressors have consistently concocted stories over the years to argue first that we were not worthy of freedom, and later, which continues today, is that we are not worthy of citizenship and all the rights and privileges it conveys, such as equal access to educational opportunities, equal access to the ballot box, etc. And so we can see the roots of the struggles that we are engaged in today extend backward into time, all the way back to our arrival on this continent. And so I wanted to make those connections for readers.
You definitely did.
Yeah, I just I want to talk about the characters a little bit more because they're just amazing. The idea that they came out of your brain or your heart and your head, it's just amazing. I'm gonna go back. I was listening to the audiobook too, but I have the book too, and I'm gonna studiously go and highlight a lot of my favorite passages. But one that really struck me was about William talking to a thief, and how the thief mused that he couldn't believe that. Well, he wondered if William was looking him in his eyes, like
Yes.
William, who's described as a man who had no fear.
Yeah.
But not in a loud sort of way, and just like a silent, kind of composed kind of way. The idea that this man was walking in a sense of agency despite his circumstances was just so powerful to me. And I'm really a big fan of Silent Mary's biscuits, and if you guys read the story, you'll know why.
Let's get that recipe.
Get the recipe for hard times. So, like Ibram, we talked to before, who joined the call, you have a body of work in children's books. And a couple of my favorites are Whose Knees Are These and Whose Toes Are Those?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, Jabari, like, who and why did you write those books for? And in the years since you crafted those stories, what have you learned about the audience of children who are weaned on those books?
Oh, sure, man. You got the tough questions. Let's see. I mean, so Deborah, you know this, but Leon and I have 5 children. We have 4 boys and 1 girl. They're all grown now. But one of my duties in the house was to help prepare them for bed, help them get bathed, that sort of thing. So I would make up nonsense rhymes, really, to encourage them to cooperate. And those was kind of born out of silly stuff I would say to my daughter to get her to settle down and get ready for sleep. And she'll be 27 this year, so it's been a while. But Whose Those Are Those was inspired by her, and I used to do book signings, and she would be in the audience, and I would say, "This was inspired by my daughter. She's inspired by my daughter. She's in the audience, but she won't allow me to identify." So I couldn't point her out because she said, "You can't do that." So I didn't. But I think that part of the core readership for those books, at least, and social media has made this really clear. Particularly Instagram. I'm not as fluent on social media as Deborah, so I'm still kind of learning about TikTok. But Instagram has proved to just provide wonderful evidence of the book's value to generations of African American readers. I've seen so many wonderful videos and photographs, particularly from African American mothers, that they post that show their children interacting with the books. And that has been so rewarding, because one of the arguments you have to make when you're trying to sell a picture book for Black children is that the audience exists, that the market exists, that there are children eager to absorb and respond to these books, and that there are parents and grandparents and loving elders who are present to read them and introduce the children to these books. And social media has just done a wonderful job of providing tangible, visible evidence of this.
That's wonderful. So, Jabari, your books are just one of my favorite things about you. I'm in awe of your commitment as a husband and a father, because those are the qualities about you that make my heart sing the most. And anyone who follows you on Instagram, and you're pretty good on Instagram, will see photos of you working in your office or even outside in the snow. I love those photos.
Right, that's right.
Working on your latest creation. And so, what's the secret to your sauce? How do you get it done?
Well, I mean, you probably know this, Deborah, if we haven't discussed this overtly, but I don't have any hobbies. There's only family, reading, and writing, and probably in that order for me. And I've been really fortunate in that I've been able to write these books with. People talk about needing a quiet space to write, and if they'd had a quiet space to write, they could produce some work. And I'm always sort of like secretly amused by that, because I don't know what a quiet space to write is. We had a loud, busy household crowded with wonderful, beautiful children, and they climbed all over me while I wrote those books. I was never like in a room somewhere and leave daddy alone. That was never part of the process. They were integrated into the process, and I think that has contributed to my ability to produce consistently. Over the last 20 years or so, I've been really fortunate as my children grew up, that the books grew up, the body of work grew up right alongside them. So it's just a matter of, putting the rear end on the chair and doing the work.
That's a really good point. I can relate to that. Deborah knows that I have a 3-year-old who usually crashes our Zoom meetings and is present for a lot of that.
Our youngest employee.
Yeah. Where can people find you and follow you, Jabari?
Oh, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and my handle on both is @Jabari Asim.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Jabari. We really appreciate you. And thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm really excited about what the both of you are doing with the Emancipator and reviving this, this wonderful legacy tradition of advocacy journalism on behalf of truth, justice, and blackness. So I wanted to applaud you and congratulate you and send you all best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for being with us on Black News Hour today. We're excited to spend the rest of our airtime in conversation with you, responding to your questions about the Emancipator. And then before that conversation, let's hear another quick public service announcement.
Dee Dee's Cry presents its first Mental Health While Black Summit on February 18th at the Encore Boston Harbor Center. The summit's purpose is to bring together residents, grassroots organizations, community partners, healthcare professionals, and elected officials to talk, listen, and learn from one another in efforts to help combat the challenges of mental health and suicide prevention services in communities of color. For more information about Dee Dee Cry and the event, visit deedescry.com to learn more.
And thank you all listeners who are tuning in today. For our last segment today, we're in conversation with you.
So, do we have any callers? Truth, can I just say, I love how he ended.
Yes.
Truth, justice, and blackness.
We got to get some capes.
I think we need capes. Yeah, I was going to say tote bags, but I think you're right with capes.
Yeah, let's get some superhero capes and get on the bus. It'll be normal.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that was now we've people are always looking out for their Black History Month like book lists,
right?
And we're always looking like what should we be reading? But I'm glad that we could put people onto Yonder and Jabari's other books, as well as Ibram's.
Yeah,
catalog.
And if you have a deeper big budget, you can buy my book too.
Yes.
U.S. Civil Rights Trail, a traveler's guide to the people, places, and events that made the movement. It's the first ever travel guide to follow the official Civil Rights Trail in the South.
Yeah. And because we're gonna be traveling again. I mean, some people already are traveling.
Yes.
We did a little bit of traveling ourselves, took a little break. But the Civil Rights Trail, how did you actually decide to write that book, and what was that process like?
I actually got an opportunity. A friend connected me with her publisher, and so to me that was a lesson in just how to be nice to people, because people will remember you. They remember how you made them feel, like Maya Angelou always said. And she introduced me to her editor. I competed for it. I had to compete to justify why I was the best person to write this book. And I I was born in Chicago. I'm a great migration baby, born in Chicago, started school in post-uprising Detroit, but also spent many years in a small town outside of Memphis, Tennessee. So this really is my story. Yeah. And the trail was designated in 2018, so it's a rather new phenomenon. So it was an opportunity to go to several cities and areas to document where the civil rights struggle actually occurred. Yeah.
Where if I want to begin. Guess what? We have a call. We have a call. And just a quick reminder, in the minutes we have, if you want to ask any questions, call us at 617-265-2679 or tag us on Twitter using the hashtag Black News Hour. But let's take our caller.
Good morning. Yes. Hello?
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. And this goes for everybody that's on the panel. Why are y'all so scared of saying or even mentioning white supremacy, yeah?
White supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy.
Very funny, yeah?
That's not funny. I'm serious. I probably say it several times a day. It's written in all of our mission and vision documents. When we're talking about how we want something to read, how we want something to look, white supremacy is embedded in all of that. We are not afraid to say white supremacy. I'm sorry you didn't hear it yet, but I hope you got it now.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for that caller. Let's get that out of the way. We're still here in the minutes we have taking questions. But let's talk more about that. I mean, I think there are misconceptions we're going to be pushing back on, and but I think we've been very clear that part of the mission of the Emancipator is to end racism. To do that, you need to call out white supremacy and racism, and you need to not only call it out, but go beyond that and explain the through line, the history, the context, and what we need to replace these systems with.
Right. It's funny because we share a job. We're both co-editors in chief of the Emancipator, and we've gotten pushback from people who ask, like, what's that about? How do you have two leaders? And very specifically, we were like, we need to like document why we're doing this together in this way. And it really is the antidote to white supremacy, because white supremacy is overly concerned with hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And we want to model a new way forward. We want to show what shared responsibility looks like, what shared power looks like. Mm-hmm. So model a new way forward.
Yeah. White supremacy and patriarchy.
Exactly.
Being black led and black woman led.
Yes.
That is really, we have the opportunity to build a newsroom from the ground up. And, I think there are people who have questioned just this model, but this is a new leadership model. I mean, we're taking things from newsrooms that we grew up in. We're taking what we know worked, what we feel worked, and we have the opportunity to put aside what we felt didn't work in that upbringing that we had in legacy media.
Absolutely. There's a raging debate right now in the industry on objectivity, mm-hmm. which is something that I don't think really exists, and I don't think that anybody really believes it exists, which is why people critique the news media so hard. Yeah. And so I think objectivity, or it devolves into a kind of like both sidesism, like, oh, let me give this other terrible idea a lot of room because. So we can make sure we hear all sides or both sides of the story. And really a lot of times this what I call the fallacy of objectivity is really the white male default.
Yes.
Would the white cis men decide is a news that's important. Oh, we have a new question. Okay, a call came in and they lost it, but here it is. The question is, being Latino, I hear about white and black issues, but what about other communities? Will the Emancipator address this?
Oh, thank you for that question.
Yes.
That's excellent. We see black liberation is the window, is the portal that we go through, the lens that we're really looking through to have that intersectional conversation. Deborah and I have talked a lot about the different kinds of stories and issues we're going to tackle. And if you look at all minority groups, I mean, most recently, not only the immigration debate, but the anti-Asian hate, those campaigns, looking at the history of the oppression of Asian American groups in this country, the incarceration of Japanese Americans, looking at the migrant workers, the South American migrant workers and the Filipino workers who, by having the Delano grape strike, they pushed back on workers' conditions and making things better for all. So, how often it is through history that communities of color have pushed back on the systems to make the system better for all. So, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And please let us know, let us know what you think that we should be covering and talking about when it comes to Latino issues from other communities of color.
Yeah. I mean, really, the black experience, from the abolitionist period to now, is just a doorway to a larger conversation.
Yeah.
And you nailed it with the word intersection. All of these experiences cross paths, and what we're just trying to do is center all the voices that haven't been centered before. And we're starting here and we're moving through. We get that question a lot when it comes to Native Americans too.
What's your favorite
You
line?
cannot talk about stolen people without talking about stolen land.
Yep. So, you all should, we want you all to follow us on social. Follow us at The Emancipator. Let us know what you want to read, what you want explained. Sign up for our newsletter, Unbound, and you can find us at www.theemancipator.org. We want you all to stay tuned for our launch coming up this year. Deborah, there's one last bio point. I wanted you to tell the quick story about just when you started in journalism and the white male default. That story about what your professor.
Oh yeah, we were in class one day. I think it was junior year. I thought I was doing something. Had a couple of internships under my belt, some bylines, and the professor is like, "Okay, we're going to write a story today. It's a really important story. Everybody's talking about it." And I'm like, "Okay, what could it be? What is everybody talking about?" It's like the story that you would obviously write today. I'm like, "What is this story?" He was like, "It's opening day for baseball season." I'm like, I was raised by a bunch of black women. We ain't thinking about opening day of baseball. Of course, I didn't say that out loud. I'm just like sweating, at my desk.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I can't believe that I didn't know this thing was so important. So because I was younger at that time, I thought, well, something was wrong with me. Like, what's wrong with my instincts? That I didn't instinctively know that opening day of baseball was the one story that we needed to focus on that day. And that's when I talk about, centering other experiences. Like, that wasn't the predominant experience. That wasn't the story of the day for the people in my world, the people in my orbit. A very important story, a story I was happy to learn how to write, but it was not these. And I'm sure a lot of us feel that way sometimes.
Right.
You may open a newspaper, go online, or look at a magazine, or look at a story on television, and it's like, well, if
where am I?
Right. There's this new TV show called Gilded Age. It's by the guy who did Downton Abbey. And I was looking at social media as I was looking at the show of the early years of the country in New York City. And a lot of young women were saying, we're so glad to see black women represented in this historic story. Because we're always looking for ourselves.
We are. Well, our time is up. Thank you all. I'm Amber Payne. Deborah Douglas, thank you for tuning in to our 5th Black News Hour episode. To follow more updates, go to globe.com/Black News Hour.